Dust spiraled through the hot wind, curling across the bone-dry ground of Red Bluff, a frontier town too small to matter and too bitter to forget. Its streets were lined with buildings half-built and dreams long abandoned. The year was 1876, and the West was no place for the faint-hearted. Wagon wheels creaked, cattle bawled from sunburned pens, and behind every crooked door, someone was hiding from a past they couldn't shake. Jacob Tyler knew something about that. He rode in slow, hunched over the saddle like a man who carried more ghosts than gear. His horse, a lean old buckskin with one good eye, stumbled slightly as it stepped off the trail into the town square. Jacob didn't flinch. His fingers were calloused, his boots scuffed, and beneath the brim of his weather-worn hat, his eyes carried the weight of wars fought with both rifles and regrets. He wasn't looking for redemption. He wasn't even sure he deserved it. He was looking for a horse. Maybe one that didn't limp. The auction yard was an ugly patch of trampled dirt framed by a rotting fence and a crowd that smelled like dust, whiskey, and sweat. A thick-chested man with a red face and straw-colored mustache stood on a crate, slamming a hammer against wood while barking numbers. Beside him, tied to posts and rails, were horses of varying misery, some thin, some scarred, all broken. Jacob didn't plan on staying long. Then he saw her. Not the horse. The girl. She stood barefoot beside a thin gray mare whose ribs stretched her hide like taut canvas. The girl looked about 19, maybe younger, with tangled brown hair and eyes that were far too calm for someone standing beside a cruel man holding a whip. Her hands were on the horse's neck, whispering something only the wind could hear. Her dress was torn, her lips split, but her spine remained straight as iron. "Next up," the auctioneer barked. "One nag and her keeper. Package deal. Horse ain't good for much, but she'll birth at least once more. And the girl's quick with feed, slow with mouth. What more you want?" A ripple of mean laughter rolled through the crowd. Jacob's mouth went dry. Something about it all scratched at a part of him he thought had long since hardened over. "How old is she?" he asked, voice low. "Old enough to work," the auctioneer shot back. Someone in the crowd snorted. "Or keep warm on cold nights." The girl didn't blink, but her fingers twitched where they rested on the mare. Jacob felt his stomach knot. "She got a name?" "Didn't ask," the seller said with a shrug. "Didn't matter." There was a moment then, brief, sharp, and cold as a prairie wind. Jacob's breath slowed. His hand drifted to the pouch beneath his coat, where the last few coins from his army pension sat heavy as lead. $20, he said. The auctioneer paused, clearly disappointed. "That all?" Jacob nodded. "All I got. Sold." No one else spoke. The silence was sour. The girl looked up at Jacob for the first time, her gaze guarded. Not surprised. Not grateful. Just watching, waiting, measuring. Jacob stepped forward, took the mare's rope, then hesitated. He held out his hand to the girl. She didn't take it, but she followed. They walked through town with eyes on their backs and jeers in their ears. Jacob said nothing. The girl didn't speak either. It wasn't silence born of peace, it was the space between strangers not yet ready to name their wounds. Outside of town, by a patch of shaded trees, he finally stopped, tied the horse, reached into his saddlebag, and handed the girl a strip of dried meat and a water skin. She took it, sat down, ate slowly, methodically. Then, as if giving away a coin too worn to spend, she finally spoke. "Clara." He turned. "What?" "My name's Clara," she said, eyes on the horizon. "Horse's name is Solace." Jacob nodded once. Jacob. The names hung between them, brittle but binding. That night, they camped beside a creek bed lined with willow and stone. Jacob made a small fire, careful not to waste more wood than necessary. Clara tended to Solace, her hands moving with practiced grace, murmuring the kinds of things only hearts and horses understand. Jacob watched her from the corner of his eye, trying not to look like he was. "You from here?" he asked. "No one's from here," she replied. "You either leave or you get buried." He didn't argue. I used to live near Fort Laramie, she added after a moment. My pa died during a cattle drive. Mama remarried. Man didn't care much for me. Sold everything. Even Solace. Said I cost too much. Jacob said nothing. He understood what it meant to be discarded. He felt it in his bones. He said if I stayed quiet and worked hard, maybe someone would take me. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. Why'd you buy us? She asked, turning to face him now. Jacob stirred the fire, eyes reflecting the flame. Because no one else did. That answer seemed to sit well enough for her. She didn't press further. Clara didn't ask what Jacob had lost, and Jacob didn't offer. Some stories are too heavy to speak before dawn. In the morning, the road ahead looked long and uncertain. Clara rose early, brushing Solace with dry grass, humming something soft. Jacob saddled up, adjusting the weight of supplies and gear. As they rode out, the landscape stretched wide, endless plains, dust trails, and the faint line of blue mountains far to the north. Their plan, if either would call it that, was simple. Jacob had land deeper in the hills. A broken-down cabin left to him by a brother killed in the war. He hadn't seen it in years, but it was a place to start over. Or disappear. Either way, Clara didn't ask for more. She rode beside him, a half-step behind, face set with quiet resolve. Solace moved slow, but steady. Like she knew she wasn't just carrying herself now, but two souls looking for something that hadn't yet taken shape. At dusk, they crossed paths with a group of traders heading south, rough men with sharp eyes and words that twisted like knives. One of them looked Clara up and down, whistled, and asked Jacob what he'd paid. Jacob's hand moved to his revolver with the ease of breath. The men laughed. Didn't mean no harm, they said. But they moved on. Clara didn't speak until the firelight flickered again that evening. I could have run, she said. After the auction. I know. You didn't tie me. Didn't threaten me. Didn't tell me what I owed. Jacob leaned back against his saddle, staring up at the stars. Didn't think I needed to. Clara was quiet for a long while. Then, just before she closed her eyes to sleep, she said, "Thank you." The wind moved gently through the trees. Jacob didn't reply. But something inside him, something buried under years of dust and silence, stirred. Not enough to name, but enough to breathe. And in that fragile moment between firelight and sleep, two strangers began the long, silent work of becoming more than what they'd been. Not quite a family. Not yet a home. But something real. Something beginning. The cabin sat crooked on a slope overlooking the valley, as though time itself had tried to pull it down but failed. The roof sagged, the door hung askew, and weeds claimed what once might have been a vegetable garden. But it was shelter. And for Jacob and Clara that was enough, for now. Jacob dismounted first, his boots crunching over old gravel and pine needles. He led Solace into the shade of a nearby tree and turned toward Clara, who studied the structure with wary silence. There was no welcome here, only potential. Potential to rebuild, or to be broken again. "This was my brother's," Jacob said. "He was the better man. Died at Cold Harbor." Clara gave a small nod, absorbing the name, the loss, the weight behind it. They didn't waste time mourning ghosts. They got to work. Clara cleared debris from the porch while Jacob pried open the warped door. Dust exploded from within, swirling like memories too stubborn to stay buried. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dry wood and something older, forgotten. The single room bore signs of abandonment, cobwebs, mouse droppings, mold along the corners. A broken rocking chair sat by the hearth like it had waited decades for someone to return. But the walls stood, and the stone chimney still rose straight. They spent the day cleaning. Jacob chopped wood while Clara swept and aired out what she could. They spoke little. But they moved together like gears, clumsy at first, then slowly finding rhythm. By evening, a fire crackled in the hearth, and Solace grazed just beyond the clearing, her ribs no longer quite so sharp. Jacob ate sparingly. He had supplies enough for a week, maybe less. Dried beans, stale biscuits, smoked meat from the last town. Clara prepared the food without needing to be asked, and though it wasn't much, she served it like it mattered. As they ate, she watched him. Not with suspicion, but with the kind of gaze that weighs more than it questions. "You were a soldier," she said finally. Jacob looked up. "How'd you know?" "Your left boot's worn uneven. You still walk like you're marching. And you don't flinch at noise, but you watch every shadow." He allowed a tight smile. "That obvious? To someone who's seen men come back from war?" "Yes." Silence fell again, heavier this time. The fire cracked. Jacob stared into the flames. "I went in at 19. Too young to know better, too proud to care. Watched friends die in mud, in snow, in places that didn't even have names. When it ended, I came back to a world that didn't wait for me." Clara's voice softened. "And now I swing an axe and try to sleep." They didn't speak of it again that night. Some truths are enough just being heard once. Days passed. They built routines, unspoken but understood. Jacob hunted in the mornings, returning with rabbits or sometimes nothing at all. Clara cared for solace, gathered herbs, and patched what remained of the cabin walls. She stitched new curtains from burlap, hung them with pride. The space began to look lived in, rough, simple, but honest. One morning, while checking the snare line, Jacob found tracks he didn't recognize. Large, deep, and circling. Not bear. Not cougar. Men. He crouched low, brushed a hand over the fresh print. Too many boots for a hunting party. Too heavy for travelers. He returned to the cabin faster than usual. "Pack your things," he said without explanation. "Now." Clara obeyed instantly. Fear didn't flash across her face. It settled like an old visitor returned. They rode west toward the deeper woods, into lands Jacob remembered from childhood hunts, thick with pine and shaded by silence. By dusk, they reached a narrow ravine and made camp near a spring. Clara built the fire. Jacob kept his back to the trees. "Who were they?" she asked finally. "Don't know. But they were looking for something. Or someone." She drew her knees up, hugged them. "You think they'll follow?" "They will if they saw us." That night neither slept much. Every snap of twig, every rustle of leaf tightened Jacob's grip on the revolver beside him. Clara didn't ask for comfort. But before dawn she shifted closer to his side, not for warmth, but for steadiness. At sunrise they moved again. Deeper into wild country now, where trails disappeared and the mountains began to rise. It was here the weather turned. Storm clouds rolled across the sky like smoke from an unseen fire. Rain came suddenly, cold and driven by wind. They sought shelter beneath an overhang, drenched and shivering. Clara pressed her back to stone, teeth chattering. Jacob pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her without a word. She didn't protest. Instead, she leaned into him, eyes closed. "You didn't have to buy me," she whispered. He exhaled slowly. "Didn't feel like a choice." "No," she said. "That's what made it one." By morning, the rain had passed. The air smelled clean, pine-sweet. Birds returned to the branches above. Clara's cheeks held a flush that hadn't been there before, more than just warmth. Life. But Jacob remained uneasy. They came across a trapper's hut, abandoned but intact. Inside, they found dried food, tools, and a battered journal. The name inside was faded. But the last page read, "Trust is earned like firewood, cut daily, stacked high, and always at risk of being stolen." Clara read it aloud, then closed the book and handed it to Jacob. They stayed 2 nights. Recovered. Regrouped. On the 3rd night, the quiet shattered. A crack of gunfire rang through the trees. Jacob pushed Clara down behind the log wall, drew his revolver, and ducked low. Another shot, closer. A voice shouted, rough and slurred. Laughter followed. 3 men emerged from the trees, greedy eyes, filthy hands, and the stench of whiskey thick on their clothes. Jacob stepped out slowly, hands open but firm. "Don't want trouble," he said. Too late, one of them grinned. You're travelin' with a stolen girl and a fine horse. You got plenty of trouble. She ain't stolen. She worth fightin' for? Jacob didn't answer. He didn't need to. The first man raised his rifle. Jacob fired first. Chaos erupted. Muzzle flash. Screams. Splinters flying from the hut walls. Clara ducked low, covering her ears, but she didn't run. She watched. She waited. 2 of the men fled, one clutching a bleeding arm. The third didn't get back up. Jacob stood there, breath ragged, shoulders hunched like a man bracing for judgment. Clara stepped beside him, eyes wide but steady. You didn't hesitate, she said. I've seen what happens when you do. She reached up and touched his sleeve, light as breath. Thank you. Jacob didn't look at her. Couldn't. His hands were still shaking. But he nodded. Later, as they buried the body under a stone cairn, Clara spoke again. I'm not afraid of you. He looked at her then. You should be. I've known cruel men, Jacob. You're not one. The fire that night was small but warm. Jacob sat across from Clara, watching the flames dance in her eyes. He still didn't understand why he'd bought her, or why she hadn't run, but for the first time in years, he felt something other than sorrow. He felt responsible. Not for her past, but maybe, just maybe, for her future. And that terrified him more than any gunshot. They slept close that night, not for protection, but for comfort. A shift had begun. Not spoken. Not defined. But real. ChatGPT said. Rain clouds brewed low over the distant ridges as the sun dipped beneath the jagged horizon, staining the plains with a blood-red hue. Jacob stood at the edge of the barn, the musty scent of hay and horses wrapping around him like an old coat. In his hand was a worn rifle, but his mind was far from war or vengeance. Clara was brushing sable, humming low under her breath, a sound that had become the heartbeat of the ranch. She looked up, her face marked by both youth and unearned weariness. We can't run forever, she said, as if she had read his thoughts. Her fingers stilled on Sable's mane. I ain't running, Jacob muttered, tightening his grip on the rifle. Just buying time, till I know what to do. Clara walked over, her boots crunching softly on the straw-strewn ground. He'll come. Callister. Men like him always do when they think they've been embarrassed. Jacob nodded. I know. Question is, do we meet him like prey, or predators? In the weeks since the auction, the ranch had changed. Not in the fences or the fields, but in the energy. Clara had blossomed, her quiet confidence now sharpened into grit. She had taken over the books, taught Jacob how to treat saddle sores, and even mended the wind-torn roof during a storm. Sable had grown more responsive under her care, and the horse no longer flinched at Jacob's touch. It was a silent peace, one bought at the cost of vigilance. Every rustle beyond the fence, every shadow beyond dusk, could be the beginning of Callister's revenge. One morning, a letter arrived. No name, just a smudge of ink and the warning, you took what's mine. You'll pay with what you've got left. Jacob burned the paper in the hearth and said nothing. Clara saw the flames and understood. Later that evening, they sat around the fire pit beneath the wide Wyoming sky. The stars shimmered like forgotten memories. I never asked what happened to your family, Jacob said suddenly. Clara took a long breath. Father drank himself to ruin after Mama passed. Callister paid off his debts in exchange for me. Said I was a bargain worth investing in. I ran before he could decide what that meant. Jacob stared into the fire. I lost my wife and son to fever. Too far out, too little help. Buried 'em both under the ash tree. Never thought I'd have anything to protect again. Clara's eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. You do now. They didn't speak after that, but something changed between them. A silent promise exchanged not with words but with presence. The next day, they began preparing in earnest. Jacob fortified the barn. Clara trained Sable with signals and speed command. She'd mounted the mare now, riding with a natural ease that turned heads even at a distance. A week passed. Then 2. On the 14th day, the scout returned, an old trader who bartered grain for water. "He's coming," the man rasped. "Callister and 3 others. Armed. Mean. They been a skin about your girl at every stop west of Cheyenne." Jacob handed the man a sack of flour and nodded. Clara didn't flinch when he told her. She simply saddled Sable and said, "We're ready." At dawn, they waited in the meadow that led to the ranch's only road. Jacob crouched behind a thicket of scrub pines, rifle ready. Clara sat atop Sable, calm as still water. They didn't wait long. The riders came hard and fast, dust coiling behind them like serpents. Callister led the charge, a grin stretched across his leathered face. Behind him, 3 mercenaries followed, rifles glinting in the morning light. Jacob fired first. A warning shot that hit a boulder near the path. The riders slowed, but didn't stop. "Where's the girl, Carson?" Callister yelled, reining in his horse just outside rifle range. "I'll make it quick if you hand her over." Clara nudged Sable forward, the mare stepping into the open with grace and defiance. "She ain't yours," Jacob called. "Not anymore." Callister laughed. "Everything comes with a price. You think she's yours now? You got no idea what you're messin' with." Clara raised her voice, steady as stone. "I'm not anyone's. Not anymore." Callister's expression darkened. "Then I'll take the horse instead. And leave your bones to the buzzards." He raised his hand and his men fanned out. Jacob dropped another shot, striking the ground inches from a rider's boots. Next one's not a warning. Chaos erupted. One mercenary spurred forward, aiming straight for Clara. Sable pivoted sharply, Clara guiding her with just her knees. Jacob fired again. The man toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. The second rider circled wide, hoping to flank Jacob. Clara veered off and intercepted, guiding Sable in a sharp arc, kicking up dust. The mare reared with a cry and struck the man's horse, sending them both tumbling into the grass. Callister rode straight for Jacob. Jacob stepped from the thicket, rifle discarded. He held a hatchet in one hand and defiance in his eyes. Callister dismounted in a slide, drawing his knife. "You think you can protect her? You couldn't even save your own family." Jacob didn't speak. He let the words fall like ash. Instead, he charged. The clash was brutal. Callister swung wild, slashing Jacob's shoulder. Jacob retaliated with a knee to the ribs and brought the hatchet down, missing by inches as Callister ducked. The knife came again, grazing Jacob's ribs, drawing blood. But Jacob didn't falter. They rolled, fists pounding, dirt flying. Then, Clara's voice pierced the fray. "Jacob!" It broke the spell. Callister turned, and Jacob drove the butt of the hatchet into his temple. The man crumpled. Silence settled. The remaining mercenary dropped his weapon and fled. Clara dismounted and rushed to Jacob. "You're bleeding," she said, panicked. He smiled through grit teeth. "Just a scratch." She helped him up, arm around his waist. Together, they walked back to the ranch, Sable trailing quietly behind. They buried Callister in the scrub beyond the road, marked only by a stone and a silence neither spoke about. In the weeks that followed, things didn't return to normal. They became something better. Clara took ownership of the ranch alongside Jacob, her name inked into the deeds. They worked the land as partners, not out of duty but out of belief. Sable became a symbol of what they fought for: freedom, resilience, and unexpected kinship. One day, Jacob sat on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar. "You ever wonder what comes next?" Clara asked, stepping out with 2 cups of coffee. "All the time," he said. "But for once, I ain't afraid of it." She handed him a cup and sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "I think we're gonna be just fine," she said. Jacob nodded, the sky stretching endlessly above them, painted with the soft colors of a new dawn. The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Jacob sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a tin mug of lukewarm coffee. Across from him, Clara meticulously stitched a tear in her dress, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence between them was comfortable, a testament to the bond forged through shared hardships. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters and carrying with it the scent of impending rain. Solace nickered softly in the stable, sensing the approaching storm. Jacob glanced toward the window, his gaze distant. "We'll need to reinforce the roof," he said, breaking the silence. Clara nodded, not looking up from her work. "I noticed a leak near the chimney last night." Jacob stood, stretching his sore muscles. "I'll gather some timber tomorrow. Should hold us through the season." Clara set her sewing aside, her eyes meeting Jacob's. "You've done more than enough already." Jacob offered a faint smile. "It's not about doing enough. It's about doing what's necessary." The following morning, Jacob ventured into the woods, axe slung over his shoulder. The forest was dense, the canopy filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. He selected a sturdy pine, its trunk straight and tall, and began to chop. With each swing, memories surfaced, of battles fought, comrades lost, and the weight of survival. The rhythm of the axe was therapeutic, a temporary reprieve from the ghosts that haunted him. Back at the cabin, Clara tended to the garden, her hands deftly pulling weeds and checking the ripeness of the vegetables. She hummed a tune, one her mother used to sing, the melody a comforting reminder of simpler times. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jacob returned, dragging the timber behind him. Clara met him at the edge of the clearing, a smile playing on her lips. "Looks like you've been busy," she remarked. Jacob chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Figured I'd earn my supper." They worked together, reinforcing the roof and patching the walls. The labor was grueling, but the sense of accomplishment was palpable. As darkness enveloped the land, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Do you ever think about the future?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob considered her question, his gaze fixed on the night sky. "Sometimes. But the past has a way of overshadowing it." Clara reached out, placing her hand over his. "Maybe it's time to let the past rest." Jacob turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "With you here, it feels possible." Their moment was interrupted by the distant sound of hooves. Jacob tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. Clara stood, her eyes scanning the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, disheveled and weary, leading a limping horse. He raised a hand in greeting, his voice hoarse. "Evening. I mean no harm. Just looking for shelter." Jacob studied the stranger, noting the exhaustion etched into his features. He lowered his rifle slightly. "You're a long way from town." The man nodded. "Got caught in the storm. Horse threw a shoe." Clara stepped forward. "We have a spare. Come, warm yourself by the fire." The stranger hesitated before accepting the invitation. Inside, he introduced himself as Elias, a former soldier turned drifter. Over a shared meal, he recounted tales of his travels, his words painting vivid pictures of distant lands and adventures. As the night wore on, Jacob found himself drawn to Elias's stories, the camaraderie reminiscent of his days in the army. Clara listened intently, her laughter filling the cabin. In the days that followed, Elias assisted with chores, his presence bringing a renewed energy to the homestead. Jacob, initially wary, began to appreciate the extra pair of hands and the companionship. One evening, as the trio sat around the fire, Elias broached a sensitive topic. "I've heard rumors of a gang causing trouble in these parts. Bandits, preying on isolated homesteads." Jacob's expression darkened. "We've had our share of trouble." Elias nodded. "Thought you should know. Best to be prepared." The following morning, Jacob and Elias scouted the perimeter, setting traps and reinforcing defenses. Clara, meanwhile, prepared provisions and ensured Solace was ready for a quick departure if necessary. Days turned into weeks, the threat looming but never materializing. The trio settled into a routine, their bond strengthening with each passing day. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, Clara stumbled upon a hidden cache, a stash of weapons and supplies buried beneath a fallen tree. She called for Jacob and Elias, who examined the find with concern. "This isn't just a random stash," Elias said, his tone grave. "Someone's preparing for something." Jacob nodded. "We need to be vigilant." That night, under the cover of darkness, the bandits struck. Their approach was silent, their intentions clear. But the trio was ready. Gunfire erupted, the night illuminated by muzzle flashes. Jacob and Elias fought side by side, their coordination seamless. Clara, armed and determined, defended the cabin with unwavering resolve. The battle was fierce, but the trio's preparation paid off. The bandits, caught off guard by the resistance, retreated into the night, leaving behind their wounded and dead. As dawn broke, the homestead bore the scars of the attack: bullet holes, broken furniture, and bloodstains. But the trio stood victorious. In the aftermath, Jacob turned to Clara, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you." Clara smiled, her face smudged with soot. "We're a team." Elias approached, a grin on his face. "I think it's time I moved on. You've got things under control here." Jacob extended his hand. "Thank you, Elias. For everything." Elias shook his hand firmly. "Take care of each other." As Elias disappeared into the horizon, Jacob and Clara stood side by side, the sun rising behind them. Their journey had been fraught with challenges, but together, they had forged a new beginning.